The sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Cathedral in downtown Chicago, casting rainbow prisms across the white rose petals scattered down the marble aisle. Everything was perfect, exactly as Emma Charlotte Hayes had dreamed since she was 8 years old, playing dress-up in her mother's wedding veil and promising herself that someday she would have the fairy tale ending she had always imagined. At 28, Emma stood at the altar in her grandmother's vintage lace gown, which had been carefully altered to fit her petite frame. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant updo, adorned with pearl pins that had belonged to 3 generations of Hayes women before her. The bouquet of white peonies and garden roses trembled slightly in her hands, but she attributed the shaking to excitement rather than the growing knot of anxiety that had been building in her stomach since she woke up that. Michael Davidson, her fiancé of 2 years, stood across from her in his charcoal gray tuxedo, but something in his blue eyes looked different today. Where she had expected to see love and joy, there was something that looked almost like regret, though she pushed that observation away as pre-wedding nerves that everyone had warned her of. The church was packed with 300 guests, family members who had flown in from across the country, college friends who had squealed with excitement when Emma announced her engagement, and colleagues from the marketing firm where she had worked her way up from intern to account manager the past 6 years. In the third row sat Min Jae-sung, a quiet Korean businessman in his early 30s who had become an unexpected friend over the past 8 months. Emma had met him during a business conference where he was seeking American marketing expertise for his tech company's expansion into the US market. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved into genuine friendship, built on long conversations about literature, art, and their shared love of obscure foreign film. Jae-sung had politely declined her invitation to bring a +1, explaining that he preferred to attend solo, and Emma had appreciated his straightforward honesty in a world where most people seem to complicate even the simplest social interactions. Chapter 2. The moment everything collapsed. Father Mackenzie had just reached the part of the ceremony where he asked if anyone had objections, when Michael suddenly cleared his throat and took a step backward. The movement was so unexpected that it sent a ripple of confusion through the assembled guests, who began turning to each other with whispered questions about what was happening. "I'm sorry," Michael said, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed cathedral thanks to the wireless microphone clipped to his lapel. "I can't do this." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Emma felt the blood drain from her face as she tried to process what she was. This had to be some kind of mistake, a moment of panic that would pass once Michael remembered how much they loved each other and how many people they had invited to witness their commitment. "Michael, what are you saying?" she whispered, stepping closer to him and searching his face for some sign that this was just a temporary crisis of nerves that could be overcome with reassurance and love. But Michael shook his head firmly, his expression resolute despite the obvious discomfort he felt at having to deliver this news in front of their family and friends. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, Emma. We want different things from you. Want the house with the white picket fence and kids playing in the backyard, but I need something. I need freedom to travel, to build my consulting, to live without the obligations that come with marriage and family." The gasps from the congregation were audible now, with Emma's mother half rising from her seat in the front row before being gently pulled back down by Emma's father, whose face had gone ashen with shock and barely contained fury at the public humiliation his daughter was enduring. Emma's hands began shaking so violently that she dropped her bouquet, the carefully arranged flowers scattering across the marble floor like the pieces of her shattered dream. She looked around desperately, seeking some anchor of support in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. But most guests were staring at her with expressions of pity that made her feel even more exposed and vulnerable. Chapter 3. The humiliation deepens. "You couldn't have figured this out before today?" Emma's voice cracked with the effort of maintaining some semblance of composure while her entire life imploded in front of 300 witnesses. "Before I walk down this aisle in front of everyone we know?" Michael ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair, destroying the careful work of the stylist who had spent an hour making sure he looked perfect for their wedding photos. "I tried to convince myself I could make it work, but standing here, making these promises, I realized I'd be lying to you and to myself if I went through with it." The practical side of Emma's mind began cataloging the disasters that would need to be addressed. The reception venue where dinner was being prepared for 300 guests, the honeymoon flights to Tuscany that were scheduled to depart in 4 hours, the gifts that would need to be returned, and the deposits that were non-refundable. But the emotional devastation was so overwhelming that these practical concerns felt distant and unimportant compared to the crushing realization that the man she had planned to spend her life with had never truly wanted the same future she had been dreaming about. "I think," Father Mackenzie said gently, stepping forward with the kind of pastoral authority that comes from decades of experience with human crisis, "that perhaps we should conclude today's service and allow everyone to process what has happened." The dismissal sent the congregation into motion, with guests filing out of the cathedral in small groups, their conversations a mixture of shock, gossip, and sympathy for Emma's situation. Many stopped to offer brief words of comfort, but their well-intentioned sympathy only made Emma feel more exposed and pathetic. Within 20 minutes, the cathedral had mostly emptied, except for immediate family members and a few close friends who weren't sure whether they should leave Emma alone or stay to provide support she might not want to accept in her current state of shock and embarrassment. Emma sank onto the marble steps of the altar, her voluminous dress pooling around her like a white silk ocean, and finally allowed herself to cry. Chapter 4. An unexpected gesture. While Emma's bridesmaids and family members formed a protective circle around her, offering tissues and gentle words of comfort that couldn't possibly address the magnitude of what had just happened, most of the remaining guests quietly slipped away to avoid intruding on such a private moment of devastation. But Jae-sung remained seated in his pew, watching the scene unfold with an expression of deep concern that went beyond polite sympathy. During their months of friendship, he had come to admire Emma's intelligence, kindness, and genuine enthusiasm for life, and seeing her reduced to this state of public humiliation stirred something protective in him that surprised him with its intensity. He had attended the wedding purely to support Emma, despite his private reservations about Michael, whom he had met several times during business dinners, and found to be charming but ultimately shallow, more concerned with projecting success than with building meaningful relationships or pursuing substantial goals. After 15 minutes of watching Emma struggle to compose herself, while surrounded by well-meaning people who seemed to be making her emotional state worse rather than better, Jae-sung made a decision that would have seemed impossible to him even an hour earlier. He stood up from his pew and walked purposefully toward the altar, his polished Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor in a rhythm that seemed to announce his intention before he reached the small crowd gathered around Emma. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his accented English carrying the formal politeness that characterized all his interactions with even those he considered friends. "Emma, would you allow me to escort you away from here? I think perhaps some fresh air might help." Emma looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes, surprised to see him still there when most other guests had already departed to avoid the awkwardness of witnessing such a personal crisis. "Jae-sung, you don't have to," she began, but he held up a gentle hand to stop her protest. "I know I don't have to," he replied simply. "I want to." Chapter 5. The Escape. Emma's mother immediately began protesting that Emma shouldn't go anywhere with anyone until they had figured out how to handle the immediate practical problems created by the cancelled wedding. There were vendors to notify, guests to inform about the reception cancellation, and family members who needed explanations about what would happen next. But Emma's father, who had been watching his daughter's distress with growing concern, surprised everyone by supporting Jae-sung's suggestion. "Let her go, Margaret. She needs some space to process this without all of us hovering around her like she's a patient in intensive care." Jae-sung offered Emma his arm with old-fashioned courtesy that seemed natural rather than forced, and she found herself grateful for his calm presence amid the chaos of emotion and logistical problems that surrounded her. They walked together down the cathedral's main aisle, past the flower arrangements that had cost thousands of dollars, and the ribbon-decorated pews that had been prepared for a celebration that would never happen. Emma's train swept behind her across the marble floor, the sound of silk against stone creating a whispered soundtrack to her exit from what was supposed to have been the happiest day of her life. Outside the cathedral, Chicago's autumn afternoon was crisp and bright, with the kind of clear blue sky that usually made Emma feel optimistic about life's possibilities. Today, the beautiful weather felt like mockery, as if the universe was highlighting the contrast between the perfect day she had planned and the disaster it had actually become. Jae-sung's car was a modest black sedan that reflected his understated approach to wealth. Expensive, but not ostentatious, chosen for quality and reliability rather than status display. He opened the passenger door for Emma with the same quiet courtesy he had shown in the cathedral, then carefully helped arrange her dress so it wouldn't be damaged by the car door. "Where would you like to go?" he asked, as he settled into the driver's seat. And Emma realized she had no idea how to answer that question. Her apartment was filled with wedding gifts and honeymoon luggage. Her parents' house would mean more conversations about what had gone wrong and what should happen next. The reception venue would be dealing with the chaos of cancellation. Chapter 6. A Safe Harbor. "I don't know," Emma admitted, her voice still rough from crying and the shock of everything that had happened. "I just know I can't face going anywhere that reminds me of today." Jae-sung nodded with understanding and began driving through Chicago's downtown streets, taking a route that avoided the reception venue and the apartment Emma shared with Michael. Without asking for permission or explanation, he drove toward Lincoln Park, where the autumn trees created a canopy of gold and red leaves that filtered the afternoon sunlight into gentle patterns. "When I first moved to Chicago," he said quietly as they parked near the zoo, I used to come here whenever I felt overwhelmed by how different everything was from home. There's something about being surrounded by nature that makes problems feel more manageable, even when they're not actually solved. Emma found herself able to smile for the first time since the ceremony, touched by his willingness to share something personal about his own struggles with displacement and adaptation. During their friendship, Jae-sung had rarely talked about the challenges of building a business in a foreign country, or the loneliness that came with being far from family and familiar cultural contexts. They walked along the lakeshore path, Emma's wedding dress creating an incongruous sight among the joggers, dog walkers, and families enjoying the beautiful afternoon. Several people stared, but Jae-sung's presence seemed to provide a buffer that made the attention feel less intrusive. I feel like such an idiot, Emma said eventually, her voice carrying a mixture of anger and self-recrimination. Everyone probably saw this coming except me. I was so focused on planning the perfect wedding that I never really examined whether we wanted the same kind of marriage. Jae-sung considered this carefully before responding, his thoughtful approach to conversation one of the things Emma had always appreciated about their friendship. I think, he said slowly, that wanting to believe the best about someone you love isn't idiotic. It's optimistic, and optimism requires courage. His words carried such genuine conviction that Emma felt some of the crushing weight of embarrassment begin to lift from her shoulders. Chapter 7. Unexpected Confessions. As they continued walking along the lakeshore, Emma found herself talking more freely than she had in months about her doubts, fears, and the small signs she had ignored because addressing them would have meant confronting uncomfortable truths about her relationship with Michael. I think part of me knew something was wrong, she admitted, stopping to lean against the railing that separated the path from the water. Michael had been working late more often, planning trips that didn't include me, talking about the wedding like it was something that was happening to him rather than something we were choosing together. Jae-sung listened without judgment or attempts to offer easy solutions, his quiet attention providing the kind of support Emma hadn't realized she needed that was offered. In Korea, he said eventually, we have a saying, even if you know the way, ask one more time. I think it means that sometimes we ignore our instincts because we're afraid of what we might discover if we pay attention to them. Emma turned to study his profile as he gazed out over the lake, struck by how different he was from the men she usually dated. Quieter, more thoughtful, less concerned with impressing others than with understanding them. Can I ask you something? She said, and when he nodded she continued, did you think Michael and I were right for each other? I mean, before today, did you see problems I was missing? Jae-sung was quiet for so long that Emma began to think he wouldn't answer. But finally he turned to meet her eyes with an expression that combined honesty with obvious reluctance to cause her additional pain. I thought, he said carefully, that you deserved someone who was as excited about your future together as you were. Someone who talked about your dreams like they were his dreams too. The observation was delivered with such gentle certainty that Emma felt tears starting again. But this time they came with a sense of relief rather than devastation. Someone had seen what she had been trying not to see, and his validation made her feel less foolish for having missed the warning signs. Chapter 8. The Offer That Changed Everything. As the afternoon light began to fade and Emma realized she would eventually have to return to the practical world of canceled honeymoon reservations and awkward conversations with family members, Jae-sung made a suggestion that surprised them both with its boldness. Emma, he said, his formal tone indicating that he was about to say something he had considered carefully. I know this might sound strange given everything that's happened today, but I have a proposition that might help both of us. Emma looked at him with curiosity, mixed with wariness, uncertain what kind of proposition could possibly improve a day that had already included public humiliation and the destruction of her life plan. My company is opening a new office in Seoul, Jae-sung continued, and I need someone with your marketing expertise to help establish our American partnerships from the Korean side. It would be a one-year contract with full relocation assistance, a substantial salary, and the opportunity to learn about international business in ways that would benefit your career significantly. The offer was so unexpected and comprehensive that Emma couldn't immediately process all its implications. Moving to Seoul would solve the immediate problem of facing everyone who had witnessed her wedding disaster, while also providing professional opportunities that could advance her career in directions she had never considered. You don't have to answer now, Jae-sung said quickly, interpreting her silence as reluctant. But I wanted you to know that there are options beyond staying here and dealing with everyone's pity and questions about what went wrong. Emma realized that his offer represented more than just a job opportunity. It was a chance to start over completely, to discover what she wanted from life without the influences and expectations of people who knew her story and would always see her as the woman who was abandoned at the altar. Why would you offer this to me today? She asked. I mean, couldn't you have mentioned this job opportunity during any of our business dinners over the past months? Jae-sung's answer revealed depths of feeling that Emma hadn't suspected existed beneath his polite friendship. Chapter 9. Feelings Revealed. Because, Jae-sung said, his formal English giving way to something more personal and vulnerable. Until today, I didn't realize how much I cared about your happiness. Watching you go through this made me understand that what I've been feeling for you is more than professional respect or casual friendship. Emma felt her breath catch as she processed the implications of his words. During their months of working together and growing friendship, she had occasionally noticed moments when his attention seemed more focused than purely professional interest would require. But she had always attributed these observations to cultural differences in communication style. I would never have said anything while you were engaged. His eyes fixed on the lake rather than me. It wouldn't have been appropriate or fair to either, but now I find myself hoping that you might consider the possibility that your wedding disaster could actually be the beginning of something better, rather than just the end of your original plans. The honesty of his confession, delivered with such careful respect for her emotional state and current vulnerability, touched Emma in ways that Michael's dramatic declarations of love had never managed to achieve. There was something deeply appealing about Jae-sung's quiet strength and his willingness to offer practical solutions along with emotional support. I don't know how I feel about anything, Emma said truthfully, her mind still reeling from the day's events and this unexpected revelation about Jae-sung's feelings. Everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be wrong, and now you're telling me that there were things happening that I completely missed. Jae-sung nodded with understanding that seemed to come from his own experience with major life transitions and unexpected changes in direction. I don't expect you to make any decisions today, he said gently. I just wanted you to know that you have options, both professionally and personally, if you decide you want to explore them. His respect for her emotional autonomy and his refusal to pressure her during such a vulnerable moment impressed Emma almost as much as his unexpected offer of new possibility. Chapter 10. The decision to take a chance over the following. As Emma dealt with the practical aftermath of her canceled wedding, returning gifts, canceling vendors, and fielding concerned calls from friends and relatives, she found herself thinking constantly about Jae-sung's offer and everything it represented. The job opportunity was genuinely appealing from a professional standpoint. His company was expanding rapidly, and the experience of helping establish their American partnerships from the Seoul office would provide skills and international experience that could significantly advance her marketing. But more compelling than the professional benefit was the chance to escape the sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that followed her everywhere she went in Chicago. Even well-meaning friends seemed unable to interact with her normally, treating her like a fragile patient who might break down at any mention of weddings, relationships, or future plans. Emma's parents were supportive but worried about her making such a dramatic decision while still emotionally vulnerable from the wedding disaster. Her mother, in particular, was concerned about Emma moving so far away from family support systems while dealing with heartbreak and major life changes. Korea is so far away, Margaret Hayes said during one of their daily check-in conversations. What if you get there and realize you've made a mistake? What if this man is taking advantage of your emotional state to get you to move across the world for his business purposes? But Emma's father, who had been quietly observing Jae-sung's behavior during the wedding crisis and its aftermath, offered a different perspective that surprised his wife and daughter. The way he handled himself at the cathedral and afterwards, Thomas Hayes said thoughtfully, showed more character and genuine concern for Emma's well-being than I saw from Michael their entire engagement. Sometimes the best decisions come from trusting people who show you who they are through their actions rather than their words. After 10 days of weighing options and consulting with career counselors, financial advisors, and her closest friends, Emma called Jae-sung to accept his offer, with one important modification to the arrangement he had proposed. Chapter 11. New Beginnings in Seoul. I want to take the job, Emma told Jae-sung during their phone conversation, but I need to be clear about something. I'm interested in exploring what might develop between us personally, but I want to establish myself professionally in Seoul first. I need to know that I can succeed there on my own merits before I figure out what I want from a relationship. Jae-sung's response demonstrated the thoughtfulness and respect for her autonomy that had characterized all their interactions since the wedding disaster. I think that's exactly the right approach, he said. I want you to feel confident and independent in your new life before we explore anything personal. Your professional success is important to me because your happiness is important to me. The move to Seoul happened surprisingly quickly, with Jae-sung's company handling visa paperwork, relocation logistics, and temporary housing arrangements with efficiency that impressed Emma and made her feel genuinely valued as a new employee, rather than just someone receiving help out of pity. Seoul was overwhelming and exhilarating in equal measure. The city's energy was intense and constant, with a mixture of ultra-modern technology and traditional culture that created unique experiences around every corner. Emma's apartment was in Gangnam, close to the company's offices, but with easy access to historical sites, traditional markets, and the kind of cultural experiences she had only read about in travel magazines. The work was challenging but engaging, requiring her to develop new skills in international marketing, while learning to navigate Korean business culture and communication styles. Her colleagues were welcoming but professional, treating her as a valued team member rather than a curiosity or charity case. Most importantly, Emma discovered that she was capable of building a completely new life for herself in a foreign country, developing independence and confidence that she hadn't known she possessed. Jae-sung kept his promise to maintain professional boundaries while she established herself, but their friendship continued to deepen as he helped her navigate cultural difference and discover aspects of Korean life that most expatriates never experienced. Chapter 12. Growing Love. 6 months after arriving in Seoul, Emma had hit her stride both professionally and personally. Her marketing campaigns for the company's American expansion had exceeded all projected goals, and she had been promoted to regional director with responsibility for multiple international partnerships. More importantly, she had developed genuine affection for Korean culture, learning the language with surprising speed and forming friendships with both colleagues and neighbors that enriched her daily life in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her relationship with Jae-sung had evolved gradually from friendship to something deeper, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the kind of emotional intimacy that develops when two people support each other through challenges and celebrate each other's successes. "I never thought I could be this happy living so far from everything familiar," Emma told him during one of their weekend explorations of Seoul's historic districts. "But I feel more like myself here than I did in Chicago, even though everything is different." Jae-sung's response revealed how carefully he had been observing her adjustment and growth. "I think maybe you're discovering parts of yourself that couldn't develop in your old environment. Sometimes we need completely new circumstances to understand what we're actually capable of achieving." Their first kiss happened during cherry blossom season in Uido Park, surrounded by thousands of pink petals that seemed to celebrate the moment when friendship finally acknowledged itself as love. Unlike her relationship with Michael, which had been built on shared social circles and compatible life timeline, her connection with Jae-sung was based on genuine compatibility of values, interests, and approaches to life's challenges. When Jae-sung proposed a year later, not at a dramatic public venue, but during a quiet dinner in their favorite restaurant, with a speech about wanting to build a life together that honored both their individual dreams and their shared goals, Emma's acceptance came from certainty rather than hope. Their wedding was small and intimate, held in a beautiful garden in Seoul with Emma's family flown in from Chicago, and Jae-sung's relatives welcoming her with warmth that transcended language barriers. Chapter 13. Full Circle. 3 years after the wedding disaster that had felt like the end of her world, Emma stood in the same Chicago cathedral where her first wedding had fallen apart, but this time as a guest at her cousin's ceremony. She wore an elegant blue dress that complemented her new confidence and the quiet happiness that seemed to radiate from her settled marriage and successful career. Jae-sung sat beside her, his presence as calming and supportive as it had been on that terrible day when he first offered her his hand. They had returned to Chicago for a business conference combined with a family visit, and attending this wedding felt like a peaceful completion of a difficult chapter. Several guests recognized Emma and whispered about how much better she looked now, compared to the devastated woman they remembered from 3 years ago. But the whispers didn't bother her because they came from a life that felt distant and disconnected from the person she'd become. Michael was also at the wedding, having married someone else 2 years earlier in a ceremony that Emma had heard about but felt no emotional response to. When they encountered each other during the cocktail hour, their brief conversation was polite, but revealed how completely they had both moved on from their shared past. "You look happy," Michael observed, and Emma realized he was right. She was happy in ways that had nothing to do with proving anything. "I am," she replied simply, and the truth of that statement felt like the best possible outcome from what had once seemed like the worst day of her. During the reception, Emma and Jae-sung danced to the same song that had been selected for their own wedding reception. But this time, they were surrounded by the comfortable security of a relationship built on mutual understanding, rather than hopeful assumptions. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Michael hadn't called off the wedding?" Jae-sung asked as they swayed together on the dance floor. Emma considered the question seriously before answering. "I think we would have been divorced within 2 years, and I would have spent a lot of time wondering why I felt so empty, despite having everything I thought I wanted." Her response prompted Jae-sung to hold her closer, both of them grateful for the unexpected path that had led them to each other, and to lives that exceeded their individual. The woman who had been rejected at the altar had discovered that sometimes the most devastating disappointments create space for possibilities that are better than anything we originally planned for ourselves. Their love story had begun with public humiliation and private tears, but it had evolved into partnership, success, and the kind of deep happiness that comes from being truly known and valued by another person. As they prepared to return to Seoul and the life they had built together, Emma reflected on how grateful she was to the Korean millionaire who had taken her hand during her darkest moment and shown her that endings could actually be beginnings in disguise. Thank you so much for joining us for this touching story about how life's most painful moments can sometimes lead to our greatest blessings. Emma's journey from public humiliation to finding true love and professional success reminds us that closed doors often open pathways to better opportunities than we ever imagined possible. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Please let us know where you're watching from around the world, and share if you've ever experienced a situation where what seemed like a disaster actually led to something wonderful. Your stories and perspectives from different cultures always inspire us and help create our global community of storytelling.